get right into it. Okay. I am Lady Rain, and this is the Reader's Nook, and we are on chapter 10 of the third section. That means that we are almost done. We have altogether 558 pages, and we are on 518. We only got 40 pages to go. So, if I read until at least 34, 35 section, then the rest of it I can read tomorrow. So we'll see how far we get. And if I get a little further, I get a little further. So see how we do, huh? And no, I haven't napped, so I'm still awake from last night. Let's see. Oh, yeah, that was definitely on. Woo! That was definitely on bright. All right. Now, we left off with Freeman Moss. And I don't know if y'all remember about what happened, but he ended up engulfed in flames. Okay. And I don't even know if I remember reading that part. I don't think I do. You know what? I don't think I do. If we remember, the clothesline whirligig, and I call it clothesline tree, okay, is what Guard had in his hand. And Moss's shoulders were inflamed with his face. You know what? I think we're going to start at 11 instead of 12 because for some reason my brain is not letting me understand where we were. So we're going to repeat 11. And it's only a couple paragraphs. So, now, Anne is in control of the screen, the control panel, and the screen says destroy. And it flashed rapidly over and over. So, duck guard. Oh my gosh. Duck guard. Gardner ducked. I am backward. Excuse me. I am backwards this evening. His bad foot hit the ground. Pain leapt up his leg again. He dropped into the dust on his hands and knees. And over his head, the whirligig began to spin. Slowly at first. Moss started at it, the gun sagging slightly for a moment in his hand. Realization crossed his face. During the last instant, he still had one. Then, the slender pipes spilled green fire into the dooryard. For a moment, the beach umbrella illusion, perfect and complete. It looked exactly like a big green one that had been partially lowered so that its circular hem touches the ground. Okay, so if you close the umbrella. But this umbrella was made of fire, and Guard crouched below it, eyes squinted, one hand in front of his face, grimacing as if from strong heat. But there was no heat. At least, not here, underneath Sissy's poisoned toadstool. Freeman Moss was at the edge of the parasol. His pants blazed up, and then the down vest. For a moment the flames were green and then flared yellow. He screamed and staggered backwards, dropped the gun. Over Gardner's head, the whirligig spun faster. The skeletal metal arms which had drooped comically downward, were pulled more and more erect by centrifugal force. Centrifugal force. Paracel's fire hem belled outward. Moss's shoulders and face were enveloped in sheeting flame as he backed away, and Guard's head, that hideous metal wailing, began again. He tried to block it out. There was no way. Simply no way. He caught a wavery glimpse of the face running like warm chocolate, then covered his face like a kid. Apologies. At a scary movie. The flames spun around Bobby's dooryard in the widening gyre, making a black swirl of dooryard dirt fuse into a gritty sort of glass. Moss's pulp truck and Bobby's blue pickup were both in the thing's final circumference. The shed was barely beyond it, although its shape danced like a demon in the heat haze. It was very hot at the edge of the circle, if not where Guard crouched, no doubt of that. No doubt of that. The paint in the hood of Moss's truck and on the sides of the pickup first bubbled, then blackened, and burst into flame, burning down a clean white steel. The litter of bark, sawdust, and wood chips in the back of Moss's truck blazed up like dry kindling in a wood stove. The two big trash barrels in Bobby's pickup, made of heavy pressed gypsum, also caught fire and burned like sconces. And remember, I told you sconces are the wall lights. The dark circle at the edge of the fire Paracel's range became a brand in the shape of a saucer. The army blanket covering the torn seat in the cab of Moss's truck sprang alight. Then the seat covers beneath. Then the tindery stuffing. Now the entire cab was flickery furnace orange, with the skeletons of springs peering up through the glare. Freeman Moss staggered backward, twisting and turning like a movie stuntman who had forgotten his flame suit, and he collapsed. 12. Even overmastering Moss's dying screams and Anderson's mental cry, "Eat shit and die, eat shit and die." Then suddenly, something let go, and whatever remained of her, there was a final, brilliant flare of green light. A sustained pulse that lasted nearly 2 seconds. The heavy hum of the transformer rose a notch, and every board in the shed picked it up and rattled in sympathetic vibration. That hum dropped back to its former sleepy drone. Anne's head slumped forward in the liquid, her hair trailing like that of a drowned woman on the computer screen. Destroy winked out like a blown candle and became program. 13. The fiery Paracel wavered, then disappeared. The whirligig, which had been spinning at a mad rate, began to slow, squeaking rhythmically like an unlatched gate in a mild breeze. The pipes sank back to their former angle, squeaked once more, then stopped. The gas tank of Bobby's truck suddenly exploded. More yellow flames spouted at the sky. Guard felt a piece of metal whiz by him. He raised his head and stared stupidly at the blazing truck, thinking, Bobby and I used to go to the Starlight Drive-In over in Derry in that truck sometimes. I think we even got laid there once during some stupid Ryan O'Neal picture. What happened? Lord, what happened? In his mind, the old man's voice, almost exhausted, somehow imperative. Quick, I can power the transformer when the rest come, but you got to be quick. The boy, David, quick, man. Not much time, Gardner thought wearily. Jesus, there never is. He started back toward the open door of the shed, sweating, cheeks waxy pale. He paused at the dark, burning ring in the dirt, and then hopped clumsily over it. He somehow didn't want to touch it. He tottered on the edge of balance and then managed to hop on. And as he made his way back into the shed, the twin gas tanks of Moss's truck went up in a furious roar. I think we know where the fire started now. Maybe. The cab tore free of the body. The truck flipped over on its side like a tiddlywink. Burning chunks of seat cover and seat stuffing began to float out of the open passenger window and floated upward like blazing feathers. Most fell back into the dooryard and went out. A few, however, wafted their way over to the porch, and 3 or 4 actually floated through the open door on the first faint puff of the easterly wind, which would soon come up. One of those burning cotton puffs alighted on the paperback novel, which Gardner had left on the table just inside the door a week ago. The cover caught on fire. In the living room, another burning fragment of seat stuffing lit up a rag rug, which Mrs. Anderson had made in her bedroom and sent surreptitiously to Bobbi one day when Anne was gone. When Jim Gardner came out of the shed again, the entire house was on fire. 14. The light in the shed. Belle! 1 minute. The bread. The light in the shed was at its lowest level ever, a dim and wavery green, the color of stagnant pond water. Gardner looked cautiously toward Anne, afraid of those blazing eyes. But there was nothing to be afraid of. She only floated, head bent forward. I like it. As if in deep thought. Go ahead and put them on the rack. In deep thought, her hair trailing upward. He's dead, son. If you're going to get the boy, it has to be now. I don't know how long I can provide the power, and I can't be divided, with half of myself looking out for them and half running the transformer. He stared out at Gardner, and Gard felt deep pity and admiration for the old bastard's brute courage. Could he have done half as much, gone half as far, if their positions had been reversed? He doubted it. You're in a lot of pain, aren't you? I ain't exactly feeling in the pink, son, if that's what you mean, but I'll get through it. If you get going, that is. Get going. Yes. He had dilly-dallied too long, far too long. His mouth popped in another wretched yawn, and then he stepped toward the equipment in and around that orange crate, what the old man called the transformer. Program? The keyless computer screen beckoned. Hillman would have told Gardner what to do, but Gardner didn't need to be told. He knew. He also remembered the nosebleed and the blast of sound he'd taken as a result of the single experiment with Moss's levitation gadget. Very hot pot. How about you don't? This made that thing look like a box of Lincoln logs. Still, he had gone quite a ways down the path to becoming himself since then, like it or not. He would just have to hope it was enough. Oh, shit, son, hold the phone. We got company. Then a louder voice overheard Hillman's, a voice Gard vaguely recognized, but could not put a name to. Back off. Back off. Hold on, all of you. I think, just 1 or maybe 2. That was the old man's exhausted mental voice again. Gardner felt his concentration go out to the whirligig in the dooryard. In the shed, the light began to grow bright once more, and the killing pulses began. 15. Dick Allison and Newt Barringer were still 2 miles from Bobby's place when Freeman Moss's mental shrieks began. Moments before, they had swerved past Elt Barker. Now Dick looked up into the rearview mirror and saw Elt Harley swerve across the road and go leaping through the air. For a moment, Elt looked like Evel Knievel. white hair or no. Then he separated from the bike and landed in the scrub. Newt hit the brakes with both feet, and his truck screamed to a stop in the middle of the road. He looked at Dick with large eyes that were both frightened and furious. Son of a bitch has got a gadget. Yeah, fire, some kind of... Abruptly, Dick raised his mental voice to a shout. Newt picked it up, amplified it. From Kyle Archenberg's Cadillac, Kyle and Hazel McCready joined in. Back off. Back off. Hold on, all of you. They stopped, holding their positions. They were not great takers of orders as a rule, these Tommyknockers, but Moss's hideous screams, fading now, were great persuaders. All stopped, that was, except for the blue Oldsmobile Delta 88, with a bumper sticker on the back reading, Realtors sell it by the acre. When the command came to back off and hold position, Andy Bozeman was already inside of the Anderson place. His hate had grown exponentially. Gardner lying, bleeding, and dead was all he could think of. He came slewing into Bobbi's driveway in a wild power turn. The old's rear end broke free when Bosman stamped on the brake. The car nearly tipped over. I'll whitewash your fence, you fucking asshole. I'll give you a dead rat and a string to swing it on. Oh, you bastard. His wife pulled the molecule exciter out of her purse. It looked like a Buck Rogers blaster, which had been created by a fairly brilliant lunatic. Its frame had once been part of a garden tool marketed under the trade name of Weed Eater. She leaned out the car window and pulled the trigger utterly at random. The east end of Bobbi's farmhouse exploded into a cauldron of fire. Ida Bosman grinned, a cheerful reptilian grin. As the Bosmans began to get out of the olds, the whirligig started to spin. A moment later, the green parasol of flame began to form. Ida Bosman tried to aim what she called her molecule disco at it, but too late. If her first shot had hit the whirligig instead of the house, everything might have been different. The two of them went up like fire trees. A moment later, the olds exploded, with 3 payments still due on it. 16. Now, with the screams of Freeman Moss just beginning to fade from their minds, the screams of Andy and Ida Bosman took their place. Newt and Dick waited them out, grimacing. At last they faded. Ahead, Dick Allison could see other vehicles parked on the sides of Route 9, and in the middle, Frank Spruce was leaning out of the cab of his big tanker truck, looking toward Newt and Dick urgently. They sensed all the others on this road, on other roads. Some were standing in the fields they had been cutting across, all of them waiting for something, some decision. Dick turned toward Newt. Fire, yes, fire. Can we put it out? There was a short mental silence as Newt thought about it. Dick could sense him wanting to simply push it aside and go on to where Gardner was. What Dick wanted wasn't complicated. He wanted to rip out Jim Gardner's gizzard. But that wasn't the answer, and they both knew it. All the shed people, even Adley, knew it. The stakes were higher now, and Dick was confident Jim Gardner was going to lose his gizzard anyway, in one fashion or another. Crossing the Tommyknockers was a bad idea. It made them mad. This was the truth many races and on other worlds had found out long before today's festivities in Haven. He and Newt both looked out toward the tree-bordered field where Elt Barker had crashed. The grasses and the plumes of the trees were blowing, not hard, but clearly blowing in a wind which blew from east to west. Not even enough breeze to qualify as a kappa wind, but Dick thought it showed signs of brisking. Here. Keep forgetting that. There we go. Yes, we can put out the fire, Newt replied at last. Stop the fire and the drunk too? Can we be sure of that? Another long thinking pause, and then Newt came to the answer that Dick had already suspected. I don't know if we can do both. I know one or the other, but I don't know if we can do both. Then we'll let the fire burn. For now, we'll let it burn. Yes, all right. The ship will be all right. The ship will not be hurt. And the wind, the way the wind's blowing. They looked at each other, grinning. As their thoughts came together in a moment of utter, chiming harmony, one voice, one mind. The fire will be between him and the ship. He won't be able to get to the ship. On the roads and in the fields, the people listening in on this party line all relaxed slightly. He won't be able to get to the ship. Is he still in the shed? Yes. Newt turned his puzzled, troubled face to Dick. The fuck's he doing in there? Does he have something making something to hurt the ship? There was a pause, and then Dick's voice, not just to Newt Beringer, but to all the shed people, clear and imperative. Net your minds with ours. All who can, net your minds with ours and listen. Listen for Gardner. Listen. They listened. In the hot summer silence of the early afternoon, they listened. 2 or 3 ridges over, the first smudges of smoke rose to the sky. 17. Gardner felt them listening. There was a horrid, crawling sensation over the surfaces of his brain. It was ridiculous. It was happening, he thought. Now I know how the street light must feel, with a lot of moths fluttering around it. The old man moved in his tank, trying to catch Gardner's eye. He missed his eye, but caught his mind. Gardner looked up. Never mind, son. They want to know what you're up to, but forget them. Won't hurt if they find out. Hi, might even help. Ask your dad. Slow them down. Relieve their minds. They don't care about David, only about the goddamn ship. Go on. Go on, son. Go on. Gardner was standing by the transformer and holding one of the earplugs in his hand. He didn't want to put it in. He felt like a man who's gotten a hefty shock from one particular switch plate who is compelled to touch the same switch plate again. Do I really have to wear this fucker? I changed the screen just by thinking before. Yes, and that's all you can do. You've got to wear it, son. I'm sorry. Incredibly, Gardner's eyelids were growing heavy again. He had to force them up. I'm afraid it will kill me, he thought at the old man, and then waited, hoping the old man would contradict him. There was nothing. Only the pained eye looking at him, and the dim slish, slish, slish of the equipment. Yeah, it may kill you, and he knows it too. Outside, dimly, he could hear the crackle of fire. The fluttering feeling along the surfaces of his mind stopped. The moths had flown away. Reluctantly, Gardner put the plug in his ear. 18. Kyle and Hazel relaxed. They looked at each other. There was an identical and very human expression in their eyes, the expression of people discovering something just too good to be true. David Brown? Kyle thought, unbelieving at Hazel. Is that what you pick up? Yes, he's trying to save the kid to bring him back from Altar 4. Then, for a moment, overriding the net, came Dick Allison's voice, excited and full of sour triumph. Hot damn, I knew that kid would come in handy. 19. For a moment, Gardner felt nothing at all. He began to relax. On the edge of a battering ram. What? I just skipped a whole sentence. He began to relax, on the edge of a doze again. His pain hit him in a single awful crunch, a destructive battering ram that would tear his head apart. No, he screamed. His hands went to his temples, beat against them. No, God, no, it hurts too much. Jesus, no. Ride with it, son. Try to ride with it. I can't. Oh, Christ, make it stop. This made his shattered ankle feel like a mosquito bite. He was dimly aware that his nose was bleeding and that his mouth was filled with blood. Ride with it, son. The pain backed off a little. It was replaced with another feeling. This new sensation was horrible and terrifying. Once while in college, he had participated in something called the Great McDonald's Eat Out. 5 frats had fielded champion eaters. In quotes. Guard had been Delta's champ. He had been on the 6 on his sixth Big Mac, not even close to the contest's winner eventual total, and had become suddenly aware that he was very close to total physical overload. He had never felt anything like it in his life. In a gross way, it was almost interesting. His midsection felt thundery with food. He did not feel like vomiting. Nausea did not exactly describe what it had been like. He saw his stomach as a huge, still, dirigible, lying bloated in still air at his center. He thought he could sense red lights going on in some mental mission control center as various systems tried to deal with this insane load of meat, bread, and sauce. He didn't vomit. He walked it off. Very slowly, he walked it off. For hours, he had felt like these drawings of Tweedledee and Tweedledum and Tweedledee, his stomach stretched and smooth and terribly close to bursting. Now, it was his mind that felt like that. Jim Gardner understood as coldly and rationally as a trapeze performer who works with no net that he was on the knife edge of death. But there was another sensation, one which was unrelatable to anything, and for the first time he understood what the Tommyknockers were all about, what moved them, what propelled them onward, in spite of the pain, which had only retreated, not left, and in spite of that dreadful smooth feeling of being as stuffed as a python which has swallowed a kid. Part of him was enjoying this. I got fur on my face. It was like a drug, an incredibly powerful drug. His brain felt like the engine in the biggest fucking Chrysler ever built, idling on fat gas, waiting for him to drop the car into gear and peel out. Peel out to where? Anywhere. The stars if he wanted. Son, I'm losing you. That was the old man sounding more exhausted than ever, and Gardner pulled himself back to the job at hand. The next piece of furniture he had to hop to. Oh, this feeling of drunkenly wonderful, but it was stolen. He forced himself to think again of those leaf-brown shapes locked in all those hammocks. Galley slaves. The old man was powering him. He was drinking the old man like a vampire drinking blood. How long until he was a vampire himself? Like them? Phoebe, stop. He thought at Hillman. I am with you, old horse. Eve Hillman closed his one good eye in silent relief. Guard turned to the monitor screen, absently holding the plug in his ear, like a newsman on a live remote listening to a question from the anchor back in the studio. In the closed space of Bobby's shed, a light began to cycle up again. Or the light. 20. Listen. They all listened. They were all on a party line, which covered all of Haven, radiating out from the center, about 2 miles from the still faint smudge of smoke. They were all on the net, and they all listened. They all accepted no absolute common. Tommyknockers was a name they accepted as casually as any, but they were really interstellar gypsies with no king. Yet, in this moment of crisis during the period of regeneration, a period when they were so vulnerable, they were willing to accept the voices of those Gardner called the shed people. They were, after all, the clearest distillation of themselves, the clearest distillation of them all. The time has come to close the borders. There was a universal sigh of agreement, a mental sound Ruth McCausland would have recognized, a sound like autumn leaves blown before a November wind. For the time being, at least, the shed people had lost all contact with Gardner. They were only content that he was occupied elsewhere. If he meant to go to their ship, the fire would soon be in his way. The unified voice quickly explained the rota that was to be followed. Some of these plans had been made vaguely weeks ago. These plans had become more concrete as the shed people became. Gadgets had been made haphazardly, it had seemed. but birds flying south as winter approaches may seem haphazard. Their migration may even seem so to others, just something which felt like as good a way as any to spend the winter months. Want to go to North Carolina, dear? Of course, my love. What a wonderful idea. So they had built. Sometimes they had killed each other with their new toys, and sometimes they had finished gadgets, looked at them doubtfully, and packed them away somewhere out of sight, since there was no obvious help in their daily round. But some they had totted out to Haven's borders, usually in the trunks of cars or in the backs of trucks under tarps. One of these gadgets had been the Coke machine, which had murdered John Leandro. It had been customized by the late David Rutledge, who had once serviced such machines for a living. One had been the Benson brush trimmer, which had cut up a storm on Lester Moran. There were dubbed up televisions which shot fire. There were smoke detectors. Gardner had seen some, but not all of these on his first visit to the shed, which flew through the air like frisbees, emitting killing waves of ultrasonic sound. At several locations, there were force barriers. Almost all of these gadgets could be mentally activated with the help of simple electronic devices, which were casually dubbed collars. Not much different from the device Freeman Moss had used to float the drainage machinery into the woods. No one thought more about why these gadgets should be placed in a rough perimeter around the town than the bird. But of course, this time always came. The time when the borders had to be sealed. The time had come early, but it seemed not too early. The shed people also suggested that a number of Tommyknockers go back to the village. Hazel McCready was designated to go with them. She would be the representative of the more advanced Tommyknockers. The stuff protecting the borders would run pretty much without supervision until the batteries were dead. In the village, there were more discretionary gadgets which could be sent into the woods to form a protective net around the ship in case the drunk made a break for it. And there was one other very important gadget which needed guarding on the off chance that anyone at all, should break through. This gadget sat in Hazel McCready's backyard like a one-ring circus under a large 5-man tent. It was the safety net. It would do many of the things the transformer in the shed could do. But this thing, which had once been a furnace, was vitally different from the transformer in the shed in two respects. The galvanized aluminum pipes, which had once led to the ventilators in the various rooms of the McCready house, now all pointed skyward, hooked up to this new and improved furnace, on 2 plywood ramps protected from the elements by more of the silvery netting, which lined the trench in which the ship lay, were 24 truck batteries. When this gadget was turned on, it would make air, Tommyknocker air. Once this small atmosphere manufacturing factory was in operation, they would no longer be at the mercy of the winds and weather. Even in the event of a hurricane, the air exchanger, which had been surrounded by force shields, would protect most of them if they gathered in the village. The suggestion that the borders should be closed came as Gardner was putting one of the transformer earphones into his own ear. 5 minutes later, Hazel and about 40 others had dropped out of the net and were headed back to town. Some to the town hall to oversee the borders and protect the ship with other gadgets. Some to make sure the atmosphere factory was protected in case of accident. And in the case of reaction from the outside world was quicker, more informed, and better organized than they expected. Oh, okay. Or in the case. All these things had happened before, at other times, on other worlds, and affairs were usually concluded in a satisfactory fashion, but the becoming did not always have a happy ending. During the 10 minutes between the command to close the borders and the departure of Hazel's party, the size and shape of the smoke rising into the sky did not change appreciably. Uh-oh, we're unstable. This is not good. All right, give me 1 second. I'm going to refresh and see if it helps. Better. A lot better. All right, now I'm not unstable anymore. I don't like it when it goes unstable because then it goes... The size and shape of the smoke rising into the sky did not change appreciably. The wind was not rising much, at least not yet. This was good because the attention of the outside world would be slower in turning toward them. It was bad because Gardner would not be cut off from the ship so soon. Still, Newt, Dick, Adley, and Kyle thought Gardner's goose was just about cooked. They held the remaining Tommyknockers in place for 5 minutes, waiting for mental notice that the gadgets along the borders were waking up, getting ready to do their jobs. This came as an awakening hum. Newt looked at Dick. Dick nodded. The two of them dropped out of the net and turned their attention back to the shed. Gardner, who had once been impossible for even Bobbi to pick up, was still a tough nut to crack. But they should have been able to read the transformer with no trouble at all. Its steady, heavy pulses of energy should have been as easy for them to hear as RF interference on a TV or radio from the small motor in an electric mixer. But the transformer was barely a whisper, no more than the dim sound of the ocean in a conch shell. Newt looked at Dick again, frightened. Jesus, he's gone. Motherfuckers. Dick smiled. He did not believe that Gardner, who could still barely thought read or send at all, could have accomplished his purpose so quickly, if it had ever been possible for him to accomplish it all. The man's presence here and Bobbi's perverse affection for him had been a nuisance, one which Dick now believed had an end. He winked one of his strange eyes at Newt. The odd mixture of human and alien was both hideous and hilarious at the same time. Not gone, Newt. The asshole's dead. Newt looked at Dick thoughtfully for a moment, then began to smile. They moved in, all of them together, drawing in toward Bobbi's house, a tightening noose. 21. Carrying a heavy head. The phrase chimed constantly in the back of Guard's mind as he turned toward the monitor screen. It seemed to have been there for a long time. Once, and for Jim Gardner, that no longer existed. His poems had formed around such lines, like pearls around chips of grit. Carrying a heavy head now, boss. Was it from some chain gang movie? Like Cool Hand Luke? Song? Yeah, some song. Something which seemed oddly mixed in his mind. Something from the West Coast 60s, a wave-faced, psychedelic flower child wearing a Hell's Angels jacket and carrying a bike chain wrapped around one thin, white violinist's hand. Your mind, Guard. Something happened to your something happening to your mind? Yeah, you're fucking A, Big Daddy. I'm carrying a heavy head, that's what. I was born to be wild. I've been caught in crosstown traffic, and if they say I never loved you, you know they are a liar. Carrying a heavy head. I can feel every vein, artery, and capillary in it swelling up, getting plump, standing out the way the veins on your hands used to when we were kids and wrapped a dozen rubber bands around our wrists and left them there to see what would happen. Carrying a heavy head. If I looked into the mirror right now, I know what I'd see. Green light spilling out of my pupils like the pencil beams of flashlights. Heavy head. And if you joggle it, it will burst. Yes. So be careful, Guard. Careful, son. Yeah, old man. Yeah. David. Yeah. That feeling of dipping and swaying out over the drop. He remembered the news film of Carl Walenda, that grand old man of the aerialists, falling from the wire in Puerto Rico, gripping for the line, finding it, holding for a minute, then gone. Gardner dismissed it from his mind. He tried to dismiss everything from his mind and prepared to be a hero or die trying. 22. Program? Guard pushed the earphone deep in his ear and frowned at the screen. Drove a heavy ram of his thought toward it, felt pain flare, felt the balloon of his brain swelled a little more. The pain faded. The feeling of increased swelling remained. He stared at the screen. Altair 4? Okay, what next? He listened for the old man to tell him, but there was nothing. Neither his mental link to the transformer had excluded the old man, or the old man didn't know. Did it really matter which? Nope. He looked at the screen. Crossfire with. The screen suddenly filled up with nines. From top to bottom and side to side. Gardner stared at it with concentration, thinking, oh, Jesus Christ, I broke it. The nines disappeared for just a moment. Oh, Jesus Christ, I broke it. Glimmered on the screen like a ghost. And then the screen showed crossfile ready. He relaxed a little. The machine was okay. But his brain really was stretched to capacity, and he knew it. If this machine, which was being powered by the old man and whatever was left of Peter, could bring the boy back, he might actually be able to walk away, or hop, considering his ankle. But if it was going to try to draw from him as well, his brain would pop like a party noisemaker. But this really wasn't the time to think of that, was it? Licking his lips with his numb tongue, he looked at the screen. Cross-file with David Brown. Nines across the screen, nines for eternity. Cross-file successful. Okay, good. What's next? Gardner shrugged. He knew that what he was trying to do. Why dance? Bring David Brown back from Altair 4. Nines across the screen. 2 eternities this time. Then a message appeared, which was so simple, so logic, and yet so loony that Guard would have screamed laughter if he hadn't known to do so would be to blow every working circuit he had left. Where do you want to put him? The urge to laugh passed. The question had to be answered. Where indeed? Home plate at Yankee Stadium? Piccadilly Circus? On the breakwater jutting out from the beach in front of the Alhambra Hotel? None of those places, of course not. But not here in Haven. Christ, no. Even if the air didn't kill him, which it probably would. His parents were turning into monsters. So where? He looked up at the old man, and the old man was looking back at him urgently, and suddenly it came to him. There was really only one place to put him, wasn't there? He told the machine. He waited for it to ask for further clarification, or to say it couldn't be done, or to suggest a system of commands he would be unable to execute. Instead, there were more lines. This time they stayed forever. The green pulsing from the transformer became almost too bright to look at. Guard closed his eyes, and in the greenish deep-sea darkness behind his lids, he thought he could hear, faintly, the old man screaming. Then the power that had filled his mind left. Bingo! It was gone. Just like that, Gardner staggered backward. The earphone popped free and hitting the floor. His nose was still bleeding, and he had soaked a fresh shirt. How many pints of blood were in the human body? And what had happened? There was no transfer successful or transfer unsuccessful or even a tall, dark Tommyknocker will enter your life. What had it all been for? He realized miserably that he was never going to know. 2 lines of Edwin Arlington Robinson came to him. So on we worked and waited for the light, and went without the meat and cursed the bread. No light, boss, no light. If you wait for it, they'll burn you in your tracks. And here's a fence ain't even half whitewashed yet. No light. Just a dull black screen. He looked toward the old man, and the old man was lolling forward, head down, exhausted. Gardner was crying a little. His tears were mixed with blood. Dull pain radiated from the plate in his head, and then stuffed, near to bursting feeling was gone. That stuffed, near to bursting feeling was gone. So was the sense of power. He missed the latter, he discovered. Part of him longed for it to come back, no matter what the consequences. Get moving, guard. Yes, okay. He had done what he could for David Brown. Maybe something had happened, maybe nothing. Maybe he had killed the kid. Maybe David Brown, who had probably played with Star Wars action figures and wished he could meet an ET like Elliot had in the movie, was now just a cloud of dissipating atoms somewhere in deep space between Altair and here. It was not for him to know. But he had reached this piece of furniture and held it long enough. Too long, maybe. He knew it was time to move on. The old man raised his head. Old man, do you know? Is he safe? No. But son, you did your best. Thank you. Now please, son, please. Fading. The old man's mental voice was fading. Excuse me. Let me out of this. Down a long hallway. And look on one of those shelves back there. Now Gardner had to strain to hear. Please. Oh, please. Faint a whisper, the old man's head lolling forward. Remains of thin white hair floating in green brew. Peter's legs moved dreamily as he chased rabbits in his dim sleep, or looked for Bobbi, his darling. Guard hopped over to the back shelves. Excuse me. They were dark, dusty, greasy. Here were old forgotten boost fuses in a Maxwell House can full of bolts and washers and hinges and keys with locks whose location and purpose had long since been forgotten. Excuse me. On one of the shelves was a Transco Sonic Space Blaster, another kid's toy. On the side was a switch. He supposed the child who had received this for his birthday used to make the gun ululate at different frequencies. What did it do now? Who gives a fuck? Gardner thought wearily. All this shit has become one big dumb bore. Bore or not. He put the gun in his belt and hopped back across the shed. At the door, he looked back at the old man. Thanks, guy. Faint, fainter, faintest. A dull rustle of leaves. Out of this fun. Yes, you and Peter both. Bet. He hopped outside and looked around. No one else had come yet. That was good. But his luck couldn't hold much longer. They were there. His mind touched theirs. Like a couple waltzing with a care of strangers. He sensed them linked in a net, single consciousness. They were not hearing him, feeling him, whatever they did. Either using the transformer or just being in the shed had cut his mind off from theirs. But they'd soon know that. Like Elvis, fat, flailing, but game and blindly bobbing just the same. He had made a comeback. Sunshine was dazzling. The air was hot, full of a burning stink. Bobby's farmhouse was blazing like a heap of dry kindling in a fireplace. And as he watched, half the roof fell in, sparks, nearly colorless, in the bright, declining day, rushed up to the sky in a flume. Dick, Newt, and the others had not observed much smoke because the fire was burning hot and colorless. Most of the smoke they'd seen had come from the burning vehicles in the dooryard. Guard stood for a moment on his good leg in the shed doorway and then hopped for the whirligig. He made it about halfway and then sprawled full length in the dust. As he came down, he thought of the sonic space blaster in his belt, a kid's toy. No safety on the kid's toy. If the trigger had depressed, the essential gardener might suddenly be drastically reduced. Tommyknocker weight loss plan. He took the toy gun out of his belt, handling it as if it were a live mine. He crawled the rest of the way to the whirligig on his hands and knees, then pulled himself up. 40 feet away, the other half of Bobbi's roof collapsed. Hot sparks whirled toward the garden and the woods beyond. Guard turned toward the shed and thought again, as hard as he could. Thank you, my friend. He thought there was an answer, some weary, faint answer. Gardner pointed the toy at the shed and pulled the trigger. A green ray, no thicker than a pencil lead, shot out of its muzzle. There was a sound like bacon frying in a skillet, and for a moment the green beam splashed from the side of the shed like water from a hose, and then the boards burst into flame. More hot work, Gardner thought wearily. Smokey the Bear wouldn't dig me at all. He began to hop toward the back of the house, the sonic space blaster in his hand. Sweat and bloody tears ran down his face. Winston Churchill would have loved me, he thought. He began to laugh. He saw the tomcat, and then his jaws spread in another big yawn. It occurred to him that possibly Bobbi had saved his life without even knowing it. In fact, it was more than possible. It was likely. The Valium could have protected him from the full force of the unimaginable power load the transformer carried. It might well have been the Valium which, something inside the burning house, one of Bobbi's gadgets, exploded with an artillery shell bang. Guard ducked his head instinctively. Half of the house seemed to suddenly lift off, the far side of it. Fortunately for Gardner, he looked up into the sky, and a second yawn turned into a large, stupid gape. There goes Bobbi Underwood. It flew up and up, a typewriter in the sky, whirling and turning. Guard hopped on. He reached the tomcat. The key was in the ignition. That was good. He'd had enough troubles with keys to last him the rest of his life, with what little might remain. He pulled himself up onto the seat. Behind him, vehicles approached and turned into the dooryard. He didn't turn around to look. The tomcat was parked too close to the house. If he didn't get moving right now, he was going to bake like an apple. He turned on the key. The tomcat motor made no sound, but that didn't bother him. It was vibrating faintly. Something else exploded inside the house. Sparks drifted down and prickled his skin. More vehicles turning into the yard. The minds of the arriving Tommyknockers were turned toward the shed, and they thought, baked apple, he's baked inside the shed. Dead in the shed. Right. Yes. Good. Let him think that. The new and improved tomcat wouldn't clue them in. It was as noisy as a ninja, and he had to go. The garden was already on fire. The giant sunflowers and huge corn stalks, with their giant inedible ears of corn blazing. But the path down through the middle of the garden was still passable. Hey, he's behind the house. He's alive. He's still... Gardner looked to his right, dismayed, and now Nancy Voss, roaring across the stony field, would lay between Bobbi's place and the stone wall at the edge of the herd property. Voss woman was on a Yamaha trail bike. Her hair was tied in braids, which flew out behind her. Her face was a harridan's glare, although she still looked like Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm, next to Sissy, Guard thought. Hey, back here. Oh, you bitch, Gardner thought, and raised the sonic space blaster. 23. 20 or 30 of them had entered the yard. Adley and Kyle were among them. So were Frank Spruce and the Goldens. Rosie Skehan, and Pop Cooter, Newt, and Dick were back by the road, keeping all in order. All of them turned toward. Here, back here. Alive. The son of a bitch is still... Nancy Voss's screams. They all saw her charging across the field on the bike, looking like a jockey riding a hard-charging horse as the Yamaha's tough suspension system bounced her up and down. They all saw the green pencil beams shoot out from behind the burning house and envelop her. None of them saw the whirligig as it started to turn again. 24. One whole side of the shed was in flames. Part of the roof fell in. Sparks swirled in a fat spiral. One landed in a pile of greasy rags, and they boomed with fire roses. Deliverance, Eve Hillman thought. Last thing of all. Last thing. The transformer began to pulse a brilliant green for the last time, for a moment or two, rivaling the fire. Cool. This one's Stephen King's Tommyknockers. We're almost done. 25. Dick Allison heard the creak of the whirligig. His mind was filled with a furious, feral cry of rage as he realized Gardner was still alive. All of it happened fast, very fast. Nancy Voss was a flaming rag doll in a field to the right of Bobbi's house. Her Yamaha ran on for 20 yards, struck a rock, and turned a back-over flip. Dick saw the burned hulks of Bobbi's truck, Moss's truck, Bosman's Olds, and then he saw the whirligig. Get away from that thing. Get away. Get. But there was no chance. Dick had fallen out of the net, and he couldn't get past the two thoughts it beat out like a primitive rock and roll backbeat. Still alive behind the house. Still alive behind the house. More people were arriving. They were moving across the dooryard in a tidal flow, ignoring the blazing house, the blazing shed, the guttering, blackened vehicles. No. Fucking damn fools. No, get down, get away. Mesmerized, Newt was staring at the inferno of the house, ignoring the whirligig, spinning faster and faster, and in that moment Dick could cheerfully have killed him. But he still needed him. And so he contented himself with pushing Newt rudely to the ground and falling on top of him. A moment later, the green parasol spread its delicate web over the yard again. 26. Guard heard the screams, a multitude of them this time, and shut them out as best he could. They didn't matter. Nothing mattered except getting to the last stop on the line. No sense trying to fly the Tomcat. He threw it into first gear and drove into Bobbi's monstrous, useless, burning garden. There came a moment when he began to believe he wasn't going to make it. The fire had caught hold faster in the weeds and overgrown crops than he had believed possible. The heat was baking, tremendous. Soon his lungs would boil. He heard dull, thudding noises, like fat knots of pine exploding in the fireplace. Looked, saw pumpkins and gourds exploding like pine knots in a fireplace. The Tomcat's wheel was blistering his hands. Heat on his head. Gardner reached up. His hair was on fire. 27. The entire inside of the shed was ablaze now. In the middle of it, the transformer waxed and waned, waxed and waned. A pulsating cat's eye in the middle of an inferno. Peter lay on his side, his legs stilled at last. Eve Hillman was looking at the transformer with exhausted concentration. The fluid encasing him was becoming very, very hot. That was all right. There was no pain. Not in the physical sense. The insulation on the mind cable connecting him to the transformer was now beginning to melt and fuse. But the connection still held, for the moment. In the burning shed, it held. And Eve Hillman thought, the last thing. Give him a chance to get away. The last thing. Last thing, the computer screen flashed. Last thing, last thing, last thing. Then filled up with nines. 28. The destruction of Bobbi Anderson's dooryard was incredible. Dick and Newt watched it, fascinated, almost unbelieving. As in the woods that day with the old man and the cop, Dick found himself wondering how things could possibly go so wrong. The two of them, they and all the others who hadn't arrived yet, were well outside the parasol's deadly perimeter. But still Dick didn't get up. He wasn't sure he could. People were burning in the yard like dry scarecrows. Some ran, flapping and cawing and screeching with their voices and their minds. Excuse me. A fortunate few, managed to back away in time. Frank Spruce walked slowly past where Dick and Newt lay. Half of his face burned away, so his jaw showed on that side of his half grin. There were flash explosions, excuse me, as the weapons some of them carried fused and self-destructed. Damn. I might have to take us a couple more days off. Dick's eyes met Newt's. Send them around. Flank them. Go to. Val? Val? Can I have my soda, please? My soda? Yes, I see. Oh, but oh Christ, there must be 10, 20 of us burning. Stop fucking whining. My soda. I need something to drink. My Mountain Dew. It's on the table. Where's my Mountain Dew then? My Mountain Dew was right there. Did I put it in the fridge? Really? It was probably me. Newt recoiled, lips barred in a toothless snarl. Dick ignored him. The mine net had fallen apart. Thank you. Thank you. Now he could make himself heard. Go around. Go around. Get him. Get the drunk. Go around. They began to move, slowly at first, their faces dazed, and then with quickening purpose. 29. The computer screen imploded. What? Door just came off. Oh! Babe, pause. Ron, pause. I can't. You gotta go help her. She's literally holding the drawer in two pieces. Yeah, the drawer's been coming apart and just finally came apart. So we'll fix it. There was a coughing explosion. It's been coming apart. Like a giant clearing, a throat thick with phlegm and thick green fluid poured from the shower cabinet in which Ev Hillman had been kept prisoner. It met the fire and produced a deadly green steam. Ev, mercifully dead at last, washed out like a fish from a burst aquarium. Ah, I had a piece of fur. Hot. A moment later, Peter followed. Ann Anderson came last, her dead hands still hooked into claws. 30. The fire parasol died. Now there was no sound but the screams of the dying and Dick's insistent voice. The summer day was an inferno. Bobby's dooryard was a dirt pond filled with islands of fire, but the Tommyknockers always brought fire in the end, and they got used to it quickly. Newt joined his voice with Dick's. Kyle was dead, badly burned. Nevertheless, Ad joined his own mortally wounded voice with theirs. Get him before he can get to the ship. He's still alive. Get him before he can get to the ship. Before he can get to the ship. The Tommyknockers had taken a mauling. That 15 of them had been flash fried in Bobby's yard was not very important. But Bobby was dead. Kyle was dead. Adley soon would be. The transformer had been destroyed. Just when the border closing had rendered their need for it critical. And Gardner was still alive. Incredibly, Gardner was still alive. Perhaps worst of all, the wind was freshening. 31. Get him. And get him quick. On the net. The Tommyknockers were on the net. They came across the fields. Came toward the spreading fire. Quick! Dick Allison turned toward town, and the net turned with him like a radar dish. He sensed Hazel's dumb amazement at the turn of events. He, the net, brushed that aside. Whatever you got out that way, Hazel? Send it at him. Dick turned toward Newt. You didn't have to push me so effing hard, Newt said sulkily, and whipped a drip of blood from his chin. Fuck you, Dick said deliberately. Let's get that son of a whore. 32. The whirligig, dead now, had started a fire that was spreading out from Bobby's house in a shape which resembled a lady's fan, a fire fan. Bobby's house, now only black bones shimmering in a red pillar of fire, was at its point of origination. Ah. The wings were spreading through the obscenely overgrown garden, and as the mutated plants burned, the fire glowed green. Passing between the flames. What are you watching? You're not watching my movie, are you? Meanie. Passing between the flames as Jim Gardner, crowned with burning hair. His shirt was smoldering. One of the sleeves squirted smoke, and then burst into flames. He slapped them out. He went to scream as he seemed too tired and too woozy. But he seemed too tired and too woozy. I have been badly used, Gardner thought, and it is no one's fault but my own. He reached the far edge of the garden. The tomcat lurched and waddled down a mild slope and into the woods. The low, scrubbly bushes on the sides of the trail were on fire, and low runners of flame were already spreading into Big Engine Woods. Guard cared little for them. The feeling that he was going to be microwaved was passing. He whacked repeatedly at his head. His hair smelled dreadful. His food fried by a child. Green fire sizzled over his right shoulder as the tomcat entered the woods. Guard flinched to the left and ducked. He looked back, and there was Hank Buck with his own zap gun. Hank had ridden a motorcycle out to the farm, had dumped it in the same field where Nancy Voss had come to ruin, had picked himself up and started to run. Excuse me. Gardner turned around, held the sonic space blaster out straight in his right hand, and gripped his right wrist with his left hand. He pulled the trigger. The pencil beam stabbed out. Excuse me. And more by luck than by any sort of shooting skill, he struck Hank high up on the left side of his chest. There was the sound of frying bacon. Green death splashed up onto Hank's face, and he fell over. Got it. Gardner turned forward again and saw the tomcat moving toward a large burning spruce at a complacent 5 miles an hour. He hauled on the wheel with both blistered hands, barely avoiding a head-on collision. One of the tomcat's pillow tires scraped the trunk of the tree, and for a moment Gardner found himself shoving away blazing, fragrant spruce boughs like a man fighting his way through burning curtains. The little tractor tilted sickeningly, tottered, then thumped back down again. Gardner pushed the throttle lever as far as it would go, and hung on as the tomcat made its way up the path into the woods. 33. They came. The Tommyknockers came. They came along the widening wings of that fiery lady's fan, and Dick Allison began to feel a kind of furious desperation, because they weren't going to catch him. Gardner had been able to use the path. That had made all the difference. 3 minutes later, maybe even one, and Gardner really would have been cooked. 4 of the Tommyknockers, Miss Eileen Crenshaw and the Reverend Guringer among them, tried to follow him that way and were burned alive. 2 of the gigantic flaming corn plants toppled onto the Crenshaw woman, who shrieked and let go of the dune buggy's steering bar. The dune buggy promptly drove itself into the depths of the flaming garden. Its tires exploded like bombs. Bare seconds later, fire choked the whole path. Dick's frustration went deeper than the bone. The becoming had been thwarted, and choked off before. Not often, but it had happened. But always as a result of some natural intervention. As a whole generation of mosquito larvae breeding in a quiet, stagnant pond may be killed by the stroke of lightning from a summer storm. But this was no thunderstorm, no natural happening. This was one man, a man they had all regarded with the kind of weary contempt reserved for a stupid dog which might bite. This was one man who had spent most of his time with Bobbi in a drunken stupor. One man who had somehow tricked Bobbi and killed her, and who refused to die no matter what they did. No. The Kathy Bates is really, really good. Stephen actually visits. He knocks on the door, makes sure we're still alive. Dogs bark, let me know he's here. But most of the time, he stays over at the other house in the basement. And then when people move in, he likes to mess with them and mess with their hair. Like he did mine. He just likes to let you know he's there. Now, on the other hand, Ophelia, and I think the other one's name is Bob. They're more of the kind that like to really mess with you and let you know that they're there. But they don't bother me. Even the ones here don't bother me. Now, I'll leave you to figure out who Stephen is. We will not be stopped by one man, Dick thought frenziedly. We will not. But was there any real way to stop just that from happening? The fire front was now spreading too fast for them to catch him. Gardner had managed to shoot down the center of the alley of fire. But he would be the only one. Hank Buck had had a shot. But somehow, the fucking son of a bitch had managed to shoot Hank dead. Dick was in a perfect ecstasy of fury. Newt sensed it and kept his distance. Dick was 20 pounds heavier and 10 years younger, and at the center of his rage was terror, like a cold curdle of rancid cream in the middle of a poisoned chocolate. The Tommyknockers, Bobbi had told Gardner, were great sky travelers. That was true, but never anywhere had they met anyone quite like this one man who kept going, even with his shattered ankle, his great loss of blood, and his ingestion of a drug that should have rendered him unconscious 15 minutes ago, in spite of the great lot he had vomited up. Possible, but happening. Somehow the fire that was supposed to keep Gardner from the ship had become Gardner's shield. Now, there was only the automated monitors, the gadgets. They'll get him, Dick whispered. He and Newt were standing on the knoll to the right of the house, like a pair of generals, watching people stream into the woods, but doing so on a pair of infuriatingly oblique angles. Dick's hands opened, snapped closed, opened, closed. Green blood beat in his neck. They'll get him. They'll stop him. He's not going to get to the ship. He's not. Newt Barringer kept prudently silent. Out of curiosity now. Oh, he left. Everybody always talks and then leaves. Why do they do that? They don't give me a chance to answer. Such is life. 34. The smoke detector, very like a flying saucer itself, flickered silently through the woods with the red sensor light on its underside pulsing erratically. Hazel McCready was controlling this baby herself. She had caught Dick Allison's wave of anger, despair, and fear, and had determined to take care of Gardner herself, by remote control, as it were. First, she had to put Pauline Gouge, whom she felt most trustworthy, to work on one other matter, and then Hazel had gone down to her office, closed the door, and locked it. From the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet, she brought out a ghetto blaster, a little smaller than the late Hank Buck's disposal unit. She put it on her desk, turned it on, took an earphone from the out basket of her desk minder, and put the plug in her ear. Now, she sat with her eyes closed, but she could see trees rush past on either side of the smoke detector as it whizzed through the woods about 6 feet above the ground. Gardner would have been forcibly reminded of the sequence in The Return of the Jedi, when the good guys chase the bad guys through the seemingly endless forest at brain-numbing speeds on what appear to be air motorcycles. Yeah, that was a scary chase. I thought they were going to hit a tree all the time. Hazel, however, had no time for metaphors, nor ever would. If they got out of this, Tommyknockers weren't much into metaphors either. Part of her, smoke detector part, on the machine side of the cyborg interface she'd made, wanted to fulfill its original function and buzz, because the woods were full of smoke. It was similar to the feeling one has when a sneeze impedes, like a rain shower. The smoke detector banked easily from side to side, slaloming around trees, popping up over knolls, and then zooming back down them like the world's smallest crop duster. Hazel sat bent forward at her desk, earplug pushed firmly into her ear, concentrating fiercely. She was pushing the little smoke detector through the woods faster than was safe. But it had been at the Haven-Newport border, fully 5 miles from the ship. She had to get to Gardner, and time was short. The smoke detector flipped onto its side and missed a small tree by inches. A close call, that. But there he was, and there was the ship, throwing back its echoes of light, tattooing its dancing sun dapples on the trees. The smoke detector hovered motionless above the thick mat of fallen needles on the floor of the forest for a moment, and then it arrowed directly at Gardner. Hazel prepared to turn on the ultrasound attachment that would turn Gardner's bones to smashed fragments in his body. 35. Hey, guard, on your left. The voice was unbelievable. It was also unmistakable. It was Bobbi Anderson's voice. The old, unimproved Bobbi. But Gardner had no time to think about that. He looked left and saw something slashing out of the woods at him. It was tan. There was a red light flashing on its underside. That was all he had to see. He brought the sonic space blaster up, wondering how he could ever in the world hope to hit that thing, and at the same moment, a wild, thin shriek, like every mosquito in the world whining in perfect harmony, filled his ears, his head, his body. Yes, it was inside him. Everything inside him was beginning to vibrate. Then it felt as if hands seized his waist, first seized it, then turned it. He fired. Green fire shot across the daylight. The smoke detector exploded. Several jagged chunks of plastic flew near Gardner's head, barely missing him. 36. Hazel screamed and bolted upright in her old swivel chair. A tremendous backflow of energy surged through the earplug. She clawed at it and missed. The plug was in her left ear. From her right one came a sudden squirt of greenish, soapy liquid. It looked like radioactive oatmeal. For a moment, her brains continued to hose out of her head through her ear, and then the pressure became too great. The right side of her skull pushed open like a strange flower, and her brains hit her Currier and Ives wall calendar with a liquid smack. That's what I'm going to make the sound look like. Smack. Like, think about this. Smack. We're in the water and we go, clap. I don't know. Hazel fell forward. Hazel fell forward limply onto her desk, her hands outstretched, her glazing eyes staring unbelievingly at nothing. The ghetto blaster radio buzzed for a while and then it stopped. 37. Bobby? Gardner thought, looking around wildly. Fuck you, old hoss, an amused voice returned. It's all the help you get. After all, I'm dead, remember? I remember, Bobby. One piece of advice. Watch out for rapid vacuum cleaners. Then she was gone. If she had ever been there. From behind him came a grinding crash of a tree falling over. The woods between here and the farm had begun to sound like a big, open hearth fireplace. Now he could hear voices from behind him, both mental and shouted loud. Tommyknocker voices, but Bobby was gone. You imagined it, Card. The part of you that wants Bobby, that needs Bobby, is trying to reinvent her, that's all. Yeah, and what about the hand? The hand over my hand? Did I make that up? I couldn't have hit that thing all by myself. Annie Oakley couldn't have hit that thing without help. The voices, those in the air and those inside his head, were getting closer. So was the fire. Gardner drew in a throat full of smoke, put the tomcat in gear again, and got going. There was no time to debate right now. Guard headed for the ship. 5 minutes later, he came out in the clearing. 38. Hazel? Newt cried in a kind of religious terror. Hazel? Hazel! Yes, Hazel. Dick Allison shouted back at him furiously and could restrain himself no longer. He threw himself upon Newt. Stupid bastard! Whore boy! Newt spat back, and the two of them rolled about on the ground, green eyes glaring, grabbing for each other's throats. That was not at all logical under the circumstances, but any resemblance between the Tommyknockers and the likes of Mr. Spock were purely coincidental. Dick's hands found the waddled folds of Newt's throat and began to squeeze. His fingers pinched between the flesh, and green blood bubbled up over Dick's fingers. He began to raise Newt up and smacked him back down, and slam him back down. Newt's struggles lessened and lessened and lessened. Dick choked him until he was quite dead. With that done, Dick discovered that he felt a little better. 39. I'm going to just keep going because we still got half an hour. I'm going to read. 39. Guard dismounted the tomcat, staggered, lost his balance, fell down. At that same instant, a buzzing, snarling projectile blasted through the air where he had been a moment before. Gardner stared stupidly at the Electrolux vacuum cleaner, which had nearly torn his head off. It bulleted across the clearing like a torpedo, banked and came back at him. There was something on one end that distorted the air into a silvery ripple, something like a propeller. Gardner thought of that round, chewed hole in the bottom of the shed door, and all the spittle in his mouth dried up. Watch out for... It dive-bombed him. The cutter attachment whirling and buzzing like the motor of a kid's gas-powered fighter plane. The little wheels, which were supposed to make the weary housewife's work easier as she trundled her faithful vacuum cleaner along behind her from room to room, spun lazily in the air. The hole where one was supposed to clip various attachment hoses gaped like an open mouth. Gardner made as if to dive to the right, then held position a moment longer. If he jumped too soon, excuse me, The vacuum cleaner would jog with him and chew through his guts as easily as it had chewed through the shed door when Bobbi called it. He waited, fainted left this time, then threw himself to the right at the last moment. He thudded painfully into the dirt. The bones of his shattered ankle ground together. Gardner screamed miserably. The Electrolux crashed. The propeller ate dirt. Then it bounced, like a plane rising into the air again after touching down too hard on a runway. It whistled off toward the great canted dish of the ship, and then banked around for another round at Gardner. Now, the cable it had used to run the buttons was emerging from the hose attachment hole. The cable whistled in the air, a dry, snake-like sound that Gardner could just hear under the rumble roar of the fire. Good Lord. The cable whickered, and for a moment Gardner was reminded of a Wild West rodeo his mother had taken him to once, in that rootin' tootin' trail drive town of Portland, Maine. There had been a cowboy in a tall white hat who had done rope tricks. In one of the tricks, he had floated a big lasso at ankle height, dancing in and out of its circle while playing My Gal Sal on the harmonica. The cable whirling out from the attachment hole looked like that rope. Fucker'll cut your head off just as slick as shit through a goose if you let it, guard, old guard. The Electrolux whistled at him, shadow tracking behind. On his knees, Guard held out the sonic space blaster and fired. The vacuum cleaner sheared off as he aimed. The Gardner winged it just the same. A chunk of chrome above the rear wheel blew off. The cable blew a wavering line through the dirt. Get him. Yes, get him before he can hurt the ship. Closer. The voices were closer. He had to end this. The vacuum cleaner skirted a tree and circled back. It tilted upward. Hey! What do you have? Give me that. What are you doing? Stay out of there. It tilted upward, climbed, then dropped into a kamikaze power dive, its chopping blade turning faster and faster. Guard steadied himself by thinking of Ted, the power man. You oughta take a look at this shit, Teddy boy, he thought crazily. You'd go ape for it. Better living through electricity. He pulled the trigger on the toy gun, saw the green pencil beam splash off the vacuum cleaner's snout, and then shoved himself forward, digging with both feet, and never mind the shattered ankle. The Electrolux struck the ground behind the Tomcat and buried itself 3 feet deep in the dirt. Black smoke jetted. Stop! Phoebe? No. Black smoke jetted from the protruding end in a tight, compact little cloud. It made a thick farting noise and died. Oh, wow, we got farting noises now. From a vacuum. Gardner got to his feet, holding on to the Tomcat for support, the sonic space blaster dangling from his right hand. The plastic barrel, he saw, was partially melted. It wasn't going to be any good much longer. The same was undoubtedly true of himself. Stop! You are not getting this now. Stop. Stop. Turkey bird. The The vacuum cleaner was dead, dead and sticking out of the ground like a dud bomb. But there was plenty of other gadgets on their way, some flying, some trundling enthusiastically through the woods on makeshift wheels. He couldn't wait around. What was it the old man had been thinking at the end? The last thing and deliverance? Good word, Guard said hoarsely. Deliverance. Great word. Also, he realized the name of a novel by a poet, James Dickey. A novel about city men who had to get slugged, mugged, and buggered before discovering they were good old boys after all. But there was a line in that book, one of the men looking at one of the others and telling him calmly, "Machines are gonna fail, Lewis." Gardner certainly hoped so. He hopped over to the lean-to, then pushed the button which started the sling's descent. He was going to have to go down the cable hand over hand. It was stupid, but that was Tommyknocker technology for you. The motor began to whine. The cable began to descend. Gardner hopped over to the cut and stared down. If he could actually work his way down there, he would be safe. Safe among the Tommyknocker dead. The motor stopped. He could faintly see the useless sling at the bottom. The voices were closer, the fire was closer, and he sensed a rogue's gallery of gadgets closing in. Didn't matter. He had shot the chutes, climbed the ladders, and somehow got to the finish line before the others. Congratulations, Mr. Gardner. You won a flying saucer. Do you want to quit or go for the all-expense-paid vacation in deep space? Fuck, Gardner croaked, tossing the half-melted toy gun aside. Let's do it. That also had reverberations. He seized the cable and swung out over the cut, and as he did, it came to him. Sure, Gary Gilmore. It was what Gary Gilmore had just said just before stepping in front of a firing squad in Utah. 40. He was halfway down when he realized the last of his physical strength had run out. If he didn't do something quick, he would fall. He began to descend more quickly, cursing their thoughtless decision, with the motor control so far from the trench. Hot, stinging sweat ran into his eyes. His muscles jumped and fluttered. His stomach was beginning to do long, lazy flips again. His hands slipped, held, slipped again. Then suddenly, the cable was running through his hands like hot butter. He squeezed it, screaming in pain as the friction built. A steel thread, which had been popped up from one of the cable's steel pigtails, punched through his palm. God, Gardner screamed. Oh, dear God. He thudded neatly into the sling on his bad foot. Pain roared up his leg, through his stomach, through his neck. It seemed to rip off the top of his head. His knee buckled and struck the side of the ship. The kneecap popped like a bottle cap. Gardner felt himself graying out and fought it. He saw the hatch. It was still open. The air exchangers still droning. His left leg was a frozen wall of pain. He looked down at it and saw it had become magically shorter than his right leg. And it looked crooked, like an old stogie that had been carried around too long in someone's pocket. Christ, I'm falling apart, he whispered, and then, amazing himself, he laughed. It did have this to recommend it. It was a hell of a lot more interesting than just stepping off a breakwater with a hangover would have been. There was a high, sweet, buzzing sound from overhead. Something else had arrived. Gardner didn't wait to see what it was. Instead, he pushed himself into the hatch and began to crawl up the round corridor. The light from the walls glowed softly on the planes of his haggard face, and that light, white not green, was kind. Someone seeing Gardner in that light might also have believed he was not dying. Almost. 41. Late last night and the night before, over the river and through the woods, Tommyknockers knocking at the door. To grandmother's house we go. They look so quiet, but they aren't quite dead. The horse knows the way to carry the sleigh. You get that Tommyknocker flu inside your head over the frozen fields of snow. Doggerel chiming in his head. Gardner crawled up the corridor, pausing once to turn his head and vomit. The air in here was still pretty fucking rank. He thought a miner's canary would already be lying at the bottom of its cage, alive, but only by an inch or so. But the machinery guard, do you hear it? Do you hear how much louder it's gotten just since you came in? Yes, louder, more confident. Nor was it just the air exchangers. Deeper in the ship, other machinery was humming into life. The lights were brightening. The ship was feeding off whatever was left in him. Let it. He reached the first interior hatchway. He looked back, frowned at the hatch giving on the trench. They would be arriving in the clearing very soon now, perhaps already had. They might try to follow him in, judging by the odd reaction of his helpers. Even hard-headed Freeman Moss hadn't been completely immune. He didn't think they would, but it wouldn't do to forget how desperate they were. He wanted to be sure the loonies were out of his life once and for all. Guard knew he hadn't much left. He didn't need those assholes fucking up what little there was. Fresh pain blossomed in his head, making his eyes water, tugging at his brain like a fishhook. Bad. But nothing compared to the pain in his ankle and leg. He was not surprised to see the main hatchway had irised closed. Could he open it again, if he wanted to? He somehow doubted it. He was locked in now, locked in with the dead Tommyknockers. Dead? Are you sure they're dead? No, to the contrary, he was sure they were not. They had been lively enough to start it all up again, lively enough to turn Haven into one weird munitions factory. Dead? Unfucking likely, Guard croaked, and pulled himself through another hatchway and into the corridor beyond. Machinery pounded and hummed in the guts of the ship. When he touched the glowing, curved wall, he could feel the vibration. Dead? Oh no. You're crawling around inside the oldest haunted house in the universe, old guard. He thought he heard a noise and turned around quickly, heart speeding up, saliva glands squirting bitter juice into his mouth. Nothing there, of course. Except there was. I had a perfectly good reason to raise this fuss. I met the Tommyknockers, and they were us. Help me, God, Gardner said. He flickered his stinking hair out of his eyes. Okay. I thought it was a different word. Over him was a spidery thin ladder with its wide spacing rungs, each with that deep, disquieting dip in the middle. That ladder would rotate to the vertical when, if the ship ever heated over to its proper horizontal flight position. There's a smell in here now. Air exchangers are not a smell. It's a smell of death, I think. Long death. And insanity. Please help me, God. Just a little help, okay? Just a few breaks for the kid is all I'm asking for, okay? Still conversing with God, Gardner pressed onward. Shortly, he reached the control room and lowered himself into it. 42. The Tommyknockers stood at the edge of the clearing, looking at Dick. More arrived each minute. They arrived and then stopped. Like simple computer devices whose few programmed operations had all been performed. They stood looking from the canted plane of the ship to Dick, back to the ship, to Dick again. They were like a crowd of sleepwalkers at the tennis match. Dick could sense the others. who had gone back to the village to run the border defenses, also simply waiting, looking through the eyes of those who were actually here. Behind them, growing closer, gaining strength, came the fire. Already the clearing had begun to fill with tendrils of smoke. A few people coughed, but no one moved. Dick looked back at them, puzzled. What exactly did they want from him? Then he understood. He was the last of the shed people. The rest of them were gone, and directly or indirectly, the death of each had been Gardner's fault. It was really inexplicable, and more than a little frightening. Dick became more and more convinced that nothing quite like this had happened in all of the Tommyknockers' long experience. They're looking at me because I'm the last. I'm supposed to tell them what to do next. But there was nothing they could do. There had been a race, and Gardner should have lost, but somehow he hadn't. And now there was nothing to do but wait. Watch and wait and hope that the ship would kill him somehow before he could do anything, before a large hand suddenly reached into Dick Allison's head and squeezed the meat of his brain. His hands flew up to his temples. The fingers splayed into stiff, galvanized spider shapes. He tried to scream, but was unable. Below him, in the clearing, he was vaguely aware that people were falling to their knees in ranks, like pilgrims witnessing a miracle or a divine visitation. The ship had begun to vibrate. The sound filled the air with a thick, subaural hum. Dick was aware of this, and then, as his eyes blew out of his head like half-congealed chunks of moldy jelly, he knew no more, then or ever. Little help, God. We got a deal? 43. He sat in the middle of the canted hexagon room. His twisted, broken leg stuck out in front of him. Croggled. The word wouldn't go away. His leg had been croggled. Near where the thick master cable came out of the gasket in the floor. Little help for the kid. I know I'm not much. Shot my wife. Good fucking deal. Shot my best friend. Another good fucking deal. A new and improved good fucking deal, you might say. But please, God, I need an assistant right now. That was no exaggeration either. He needed more than just a little. The thick cables split off into 8 thinner ones, each ending not in an earplug, but in a set of headphones. If he had been playing Russian roulette back in Bobby's shed, this was like sticking his head in a cannon and asking someone to pull the lanyard. But it had to be done. He picked up one set of headphones, noticed again how the centers bulged inward, and then looked toward the tangle of brown, sear bodies in the far corner of the room. Tommyknockers? Hey, nonny nonsense, name or not. It was still too good for them. Cavemen from space. That was all they had been. Long claws operating machinery that they made but didn't even try to understand. Toes like the spurs on fighting cocks. This thing was a malignant tumor that needed quick removal. Please, God, let my little idea be right. Could he tap all of them? That was really the $64,000 question, wasn't it? If the becoming was a closed system, something on the skin of the ship simply biodegrading into the atmosphere, the answer was probably no. But Gardner had to come to think, or perhaps only to hope, that it was an open system where the ship fed the humans, causing them to become, and the humans fed the ship so it could, what, come again? Of course. Could one use the word resurrection? Sorry, no, too noble. If he was right, this was a kind of freak show parthenogenesis, whose proper place was under tawdry carnival lights and in cheap tabloids. Not in undying myths or religious creeds. An open system, a slave system, quite literally a go fuck yourself system. Please God. That'll help right now? Gardner donned the headphones. It happened instantaneously. No sensation of pain this time, only a great white radiance. The light in the control room flashed up to full bright. One of the walls turned into a window again, showing the smoky sky and the fringe of trees. And then another of the room's 8 walls went transparent. Another. In the space of seconds, Guard seemed to be sitting in a open space with the sky above him and the trench with its silvery netting on either side. The ship seemed to have disappeared. He had a 360-degree view. Motors kicked in one by one and cycled up to full running pitch. A bell was ringing somewhere. Huge, thudding relays kicked over one by one, making the metal deck shiver under him. The feeling of power was incredible. He felt as though the Mississippi was running through his head at flood level. He sensed it was killing him, but that was okay. I've tapped them all, Gardner thought faintly. Oh God, thank you, God. I've tapped them all. It worked. The ship began to tremble, to vibrate. The vibration became spasms of racking shudders. The time had come. Baring the last few of his teeth, Gardner prepared to reach down and grasp his own bootstraps. 44. He had tapped all of them, but it was Dick Allison, because of the greater evolution, and Hazel's 40 or so border watchers back in town who bore the brunt of the ship's powering up process. These latter were all tied together neatly in one unified web, and the ship simply reached out for it. They slumped over, blood trickling from their eyes and noses, and died as the ship sucked their brains up. The ship drew from the Tommyknockers in the woods as well, and the several of the older ones died. Most, however, felt only an excruciating pain in their heads as they either knelt or lay, half fainting around the perimeter of the clearing. A few understood that the fire was very close now, as the wind freshened. That burning lady's fan spread and spread. Smoke ran across the clearing in thick, grayish-white clouds. The fire crackled and thundered. 45. Now, Gardner thought. He felt something in his mind slip, and catch firmly. It was like a gear shift. There was pain, but it was bearable. There, feeling most of the pain, he thought faintly. The sides of the trench appeared to move. At first, just a little, then a little more. There was a grinding, squealing sound. Gardner bore down, his brow locked in a tremendous frown, his eyes squeezed into slits. The silvery mesh began to slip past, slowly but steadily. Not that it was moving at all, of course. It was the ship that was moving. That grinding noise was the sound of it pulling itself free of the bedrock which had held it so long. Going up, he thought coherently. Ladies' lingerie, hosiery, notions, and be sure to visit our pet department. It was gaining speed. The trench walls passing more quickly to either side. The sky widened out ahead. It was a dull gunmetal color. Sparks twisted by like formations of tiny burning birds. He brimmed with exultation. Gardner thought of looking out of the subway window as the train left the station slowly at first, then beginning to speed up. How the tile walls seemed to roll backward. Like the strip of paper in a player piano. How you could read the ads as they passed from left to right. Annie. a chorus line. These times demand the times. Touch the velvet, then into the darkness, where there was only movement and a vague sensation of black walls rushing past. A klaxon went off 3 times, nearly deafening him, making him shriek. Fresh blood splattered into his lap. The ship shuddered and rumbled and squealed and dragged itself out of the earth's crypt. It rose into the thickening bands of smoke and hazy sunlight. Its polished flank, coming out of the trench, out and up, a moving metal wall. One standing right next to this insane sight might have been tempted to believe that the earth was creating a stainless steel mountain or injecting a titanium wall into the air. As the arc of the edge grew broader and broader, it reached the edges of the trench Bobbi and Gardner had dug steadily wider, ripping at the earth with their smart, stupid tools like half-wits trying to perform a cesarean section. Up and out, and out and up. Rocks squealed, the earth moaned, dust and smoke of friction fumed from the trench. Up close, the illusion of an emerging mountain or wall held, but even from such a short distance away as the edge of the clearing, the thing's circular shape was revealed. The titanic shape of the saucer, now emerging from the earth like a great engine. It was silent, but the clearing was filled with the coarse thunder of breaking rock. Up and out it came, cutting the trench wider and wider, its shadow gradually covering the whole clearing in burning woods. Its leading edge, the one Bobbi had stumbled over, sheared off the top of the tallest spruce in the forest and sent it tumbling and crashing to the ground. And still the ship birthed itself from the womb which had held it so long, continued until it covered the whole sky and was reborn. Then it stopped cutting the trench wider. A moment later, there was actually a gap between the edges of the trench and the edge of the emerging ship. Its center had at last been reached and passed. The ship rumbled out of the smoky trench, emerging into the smoky sunshine, and at last the squealing, rumbling sounds ceased, and there was daylight between the ground and the ship. It was out. It rose on a slanted, canted angle, and then came to a horizontal, crushing trees with its unknowable weight, bursting their trunks open. Sap sprayed the air with thin amber veils. It moved with slow, ponderous elegance through the burning day, cutting a swath along the tops of the trees, like a clipper trimming a hedge. Then it hovered, as if waiting for something. Oh, excuse me. Oh, Lord. 46. Now the floor below Gardner was also transparent. He seemed to be sitting on thin air, looking down at the billowing reefs of smoke coming from the edge of the woods and filling the air. The ship was fully alive now, but he was fading fast. Well, now at least... Hey! No! Would you get out from my blanket, please? Excuse you. Now. Good Lord! I don't know why you gotta bark at everybody going through. Somebody's passing the house. Thank you. Now stop. No. Nope. You're not getting to the window. Stop. No. That's enough. You have told me somebody's there. Now I'm telling you that's enough. Thank you, but that's enough. Now we know who was driving the ship, and we know what caused the fire. In all honesty, I don't know what you guys thought happened, but I kind of thought that somehow the ship got out and burned the woods. I like this better. His hands crept up to the earphones. Scotty, he thought, gimme warp speed. We're blowing this disco. He bore down hard inside his mind, and this time the pain was thick and fibrous and sickening. Meltdown, he thought dimly. This is what meltdown feels like. There was a sensation of tremendous speed. A hand knocked him sprawling to the deck. Although there was no sensation of multi-G-force, the Tommyknockers had apparently found a way to beat that. The ship didn't tilt. It simply rose straight up into the air. Instead of blotting out the whole sky, it blotted out only 3/4 and a half. It flew indistinct in the smoke. Its hard-edged metal alloy reality growing fuzzy and thus dreamy. Then it was gone in the smoke, leaving only a dazed, drained Tommyknockers. The dazed, drained Tommyknockers to try to find their feet before the fire could overtake them. It left the Tommyknockers and the clearing and the lean-to and the trench. Like a black socket. Huh? Who did what? Bump into the jar. You know what? Leave it. We already know. Like a black socket from which some poisonous fang had been drawn. 47. Guard lay on the floor of the control room, staring up. As he watched, the smoky, chromed look of the sky disappeared. It became blue again, the brightest, clearest blue he had ever seen. Gorgeous, he tried to say, but no word came out, not even a croak. He swallowed blood and coughed, his eyes never leaving the brilliant sky. It's blue, deep into indigo, then to purple. Please don't let it stop now, please. Purple to black. And now, in that blackness, he saw the first hard chips of stars. The klaxon blared again. He felt fresh pain as the ship drew from him, and there was a sensation of increasing speed as it slipped into a higher gear. Where are we going? Gardner thought incoherently, and then the blackness overtook him as the ship fled up and out, escaping the envelope of the Earth's atmosphere as easily as it had escaped the ground which had held it for so long. Where are we? Up and up and out and out the ship rose, and Jim Gardner, born in Portland, Maine, went with it. He drifted down through black levels of unconsciousness, and shortly before a final vomiting began, a vomiting of which he was never even aware, he had a dream so real that he smiled as he lay in the middle of blackness, surrounded by space and with the earth below him like a giant blue-gray croquet marble. He had somehow gotten through it. Patricia McCardle had tried to break him, but she had never quite been able to do it. Now, he was back in Haven, and there was Bobbi coming down the porch steps and across the dooryard to meet him. And Peter was barking and wagging his tail, and Guard grabbed Bobbi and hugged her, because it was good to be with your friends, good to be where you belonged, good to have some safe haven to come to. Lying on the transparent floor of the control room, already better than 70,000 miles out in space, Jim Gardner lay in a widening pool of his own blood and smiled. Epilogue. Curl up, baby, curl up tight. Curl up, baby, keep it all out of sight. Under cover, keep it all out of sight. Under cover of the night. The Rolling Stones, Under Cover. Oh, every night and every day, a little piece of you is falling away. Toe your line and play your game. Let the anesthetic cover it all. Till one day they call your name. You're only waiting for the hammer to fall. Queen, hammer to fall. Yeah, just a few pages here. 1. Most of them died in the fire. Not all. 100 or more never reached the clearing at all before the ship pulled itself out of the ground and disappeared into the sky. Some, like Elt Barker, who had gone flying off his motorcycle, did not reach it because they had been wounded or killed on the way. Fortunes of war. Others, like Ashley Revolve and old Ms. Timms, who was the town librarian on Tuesdays and Thursdays, were simply too late or too slow. Nor were all of those who did reach the clearing killed. The ship had gone into the sky, and the awful, draining power which had seized them dwindled away to nothing before the fire reached the clearing, although by then sparks were drifting down and many of the smaller trees at the eastern edge were blazing. Some of them managed to stumble and limp further into the woods ahead of that spreading, fiery fan. Of course, going straight west was no good to these few. Rosalie Skihon was among them, as were Frank Spruce and Rudy Barfield, brother of the late and mostly unlaminated Pitts, because eventually they would run out of breathable air in spite of the prevailing winds. So it was necessary to first go west and then turn either south or north and in effect to button hook around the fire front. A desperation play where the penalty for failure was not losing the ball but being roasted to cinders in Big Engine Woods. A few, not all, but a few, actually did make it. Most, however, died in the clearing where Bobbi Anderson and Jim Gardner had worked so long and hard. Died within feet of that empty socket where something had been buried and then pulled. They had been used roughly by the power, which was much greater than the early tentative state of their becoming could cope with. The ship had reached out to the net of their minds, seized it, and used it to obey the controller's weak but unmistakable command, which had been expressed as warp speed to the ship's organic cybernetic circuits. The word warp speed was not in the ship's vocabulary, but the concept was clear. The living lay on the ground, most unconscious, some deeply dazed. A few sat up, holding their heads and moaning, oblivious to the sparks drifting down around them. Some, mindful of the danger coming from the east, tried to get up and fell back. One of those who did not fall back was Chip McCausland, who lived on Dugout Road with his common-law wife and about 10 kids, 2 months and 1,000,000 years ago. Bobbi Anderson had gone to Chip for her egg cartons to hold her expanding collection of batteries. Chip shambled halfway across the clearing like an old drunk and fell into the empty trench. He tumbled, shrieking, all the way to the bottom, where he died of a broken neck and a shattered skull. Others who understood the danger of the fire and who could possibly have gotten away elected not to do so. The becoming was at an end. It had ended with the departure of the ship. The purpose of their lives had been canceled. So they only sat and waited for the fire to take care of what remained of them, too. By nightfall, there were less than 200 people left alive in Haven. Most of the township's heavily wooded western half was burned or was burning flat. The wind grew stronger yet. The air began to change, and the remaining Tommyknockers, gasping and whey-faced, gathered in Hazel McCready's yard. Bill Golden and Bryant Brown got the big air exchanger going. The survivors gathered around it as homesteaders might once have gathered around a stove on a bitter night. Their tortured breathing gradually eased. Bryant looked over at Phil. Weather for tomorrow? Clear skies, diminishing winds. Marie was standing nearby, and Bryant saw her relax. Good. That's good. And so it was for the time being, but the winds were not going to remain calm for the rest of their lives. And with the ship gone, there was only this gadget and 24 truck batteries between them and eventual strangulation. How long? Brian asked, and no one answered. There was only the flat shine of their frightened, inhuman eyes in the fire-shot night. Are you watching Rat Race? Whoopi Goldberg's in Rat Race? Inhuman eyes in the fire-shot night. 3. The following morning, there were 20 less. During the night, John Leandro's story had broken worldwide, with all the force of a hammerfall. State and defense departments denied everything, but dozens of people had taken photographs of the ship as the ship rose. These photographs were persuasive, and no one could stop the flood of leaks from such informed sources as frightened residents of the surrounding towns and the first arriving National Guardsmen. The Haven border barriers held, at least for the time being. The fire front had advanced into Newport, where the flames were finally being brought under control. Several Tommyknockers blew their brains out in the night. Polly Andrews swallowed Drano. Bill Golden awoke to discover that Queenie, his wife of 20 years, had jumped into Hazel McCready's dry well. That day, there were only 4 suicides, but the nights were worse. By the time the army finally broke into Haven, like inept burglars, into a strong safe later that week, there were less than 80 Tommyknockers left. Justin Hurd shot a fat army sergeant with a kid's Daisy air rifle that squirted green fire. The fat sergeant exploded. A scarred E4 in the APC just then roaring past Hooters Market turned the .50 caliber he was sitting behind on Justin Hurd, who was standing in front of the hardware store wearing only a yellow pair of Hanes underpants and his orange work shoes. Fix them woodchucks, Justin was screaming. Fix them all. You're fucking A. You're... And then he was hit by some 20 .50 caliber slugs. Justin nearly exploded too. The E4 puked into his gas mask and nearly choked on the stuff before someone could get a fresh one over his face. Someone get that pop gun, the major shouted through an electric bullhorn. His mask muffled the words, but did not destroy them. Get it, but be careful. Pick it up by the barrel. I repeat, be extremely careful. Don't point it at anyone. Pointing it at someone, guard would have said, always comes later. 4. More than a dozen were shot down on the first day of the invasion by scared, trigger-happy soldiers, kids, most of them, who pursued the Tommyknockers from house to house. After a while, some of the invaders' fear began to rub off. By afternoon, they were actually having fun. They were like men driving rabbits through wheat. 24 more were killed after the army doctors and Pentagon brain trusters realized that the air outside of Haven was lethal to these freak show mutations who had once been American taxpayers. The fact that the invaders could not breathe the air inside Haven would have seemed to have made the converse self-evident. But in all the excitement, no one was really thinking very well. Guard wouldn't have found this very surprising. Now there were only 40 or so. Most were insane. Those who wouldn't talk. A makeshift stockade was built in the area which passed for the town square in Haven Village, just below and to the right of the towerless town hall. They were kept there for another week, and during that period, another 14 died. The changed air was analyzed. The machine which manufactured it was carefully studied. The failing batteries were replaced, as Bobbi had suggested. It didn't take the brain trusters longed to understand the mechanics of the device, and the underlying principles were already being studied at MIT, Caltech, Bell Labs, and the shop in Virginia by scientists who were nearly vomiting with excitement. The remaining 26 Tommyknockers, looking like the weary, pox-rattled remnants of the final Apache tribe in existence, were flown in the controlled environment cargo bay of a C-140 Starlifter to the government installation in Virginia. The installation, which had once been burned to the ground by a child, was the shop. There they were studied, and there they died one by one by one. The last survivor was Alice Kimball, the school teacher who was a lesbian, a fact Becca Paulson had learned from Jesus one hot day in July. She died on October 31st, Halloween. 5. At about the same time Queenie Golden was standing on the edge of Hazel's dry well and preparing to jump in, a nurse stepped into Hilly Brown's room to check on the boy, who had shown some faint signs of returning consciousness over the last couple of days. She looked at the bed and frowned. She couldn't be seeing what she was seeing. It was an illusion of some kind, a double shadow thrown onto the wall by the light from the corridor. She flipped the wall switch and took a step closer. Her mouth dropped open. It hadn't been an illusion. There were 2 shadows on the wall because there were 2 boys in the bed. They slept with their arms wrapped around each other. What? She took another step, her hand going unconsciously to the crucifix she wore around her neck. One of them, of course, was Hilly Brown, his face thin and wasted, his arms seemingly no thicker than sticks, his skin nearly as white as his hospital Johnny. She didn't know the other boy, who was very young. He was wearing blue shorts and a t-shirt which read, "They call me Dr. Love." His feet were black with dirt, and something about that dirt seemed unnatural to her. What? She whispered again. What? She whispered again. And the younger boy stirred and wrapped his arms more tightly around Hilly's neck. His cheek rested against Hilly's shoulder, and she saw that something like terror, that the boys looked very much alike. She decided she had to call Dr. Greenleaf about this right now. She turned to leave, heart beating fast, one hand still clutching at her crucifix, and saw something that was quite impossible. What? She whispered for the third and last time. Her eyes were very wide. More of that strange black dirt on the floor, tracks on the floor leading to the bed. The little boy had crossed to the bed and gotten in. The 2 boys' facial resemblance suggested that this was Hilly's missing and long since presumed dead brother. The tracks didn't come from the hall. They started in the middle of the floor, as if the boy had come from nowhere. The nurse bolted from the room, screaming for Dr. Greenleaf. There was only one place for guard to send him, and that was to Hilly in the hospital. That's why Hilly wasn't in Haven when it all happened. He had been in the hospital this whole time. 6. Hilly Brown opened his eyes. David? Shut up, Hilly, I'm sleeping. Hilly smiled, not sure where he was, not sure when he was, sure only that many things had been wrong. Just what those things had been no longer mattered, because everything was okay now. David was here, warm and solid against him. Me too, Hilly said. We gotta trade G.I. Joes tomorrow. Why? I don't know, but we got to, I promised. When? I don't know. As long as I get Crystal Ball, David said, settling himself more firmly into the crook of Hilly's arm. Well, okay. Silence. There was a dim commotion at the nurse's station down the hall. But here, there was silence. and this sweet warmth of boys. Hilly? What? Hilly muttered. It was cold where I was. Was it? Yes. Better now? Better. I love you, Hilly. I love you too, David. I'm sorry. For what? I don't know. Oh. David's hand groped for the blanket and found it and pulled it up. 93 million miles from the sun and 100 parsecs from the axial pole of the galaxy, Haley and David Brown slept in each other's arms. August 19th, 1982. May 19th, 1987. I think those are the boys' birth dates. I do. I think those are the boys' birth dates. If I'm right, those are the boys' birth dates. Haley born in 82. And David born in 87. That makes sense. Because Haley was 9 and David was 4. So, when Guard saved David, how he lived on Altair 4 so long, nobody knows. It was the middle of nowhere. It was the middle of everywhere. Nobody will really know. But when it asked Guard where to send him, Guard knew. Send him to Hilly. That's all it needed to know, and it would find him. So, yes, I told you, once I get into a story, I really show emotion, and to know the boys enough in a minute to know the boys were together was amazing. It really made the story work. And to know that the Tommyknockers, who tried to kill the human race, or take over the human race, whatever, are gone, it helps too. So, I don't know if you guys read a lot of Stephen King, but there's a lot of alien, a lot of horror, that's like a third alien book? Yeah. I think that's the third alien book I've read. Well, fourth if you count the gray matter. Gray matter, I think, kind of had to do with Dreamcatcher. So, anyway, I'm going to let you guys go. I am taking the next few days off. We're going to see if we can get rid of this cough, or at least get it to get better. Plus, it's the new year. We are done with our books. So, why don't we take the next couple of days off? Everybody enjoy their new year. Party hardy. Have fun with your families. Everybody have a happy new year. And be a better person next year than you were this year. Everybody can make improvements. That's my plan anyway. Be the best person you can be. Be kind. Be loving. I love y'all. We will talk about our next book when I come back Tuesday. All right? Love y'all. Bye.